Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Trident Talks. I'm Sean, I head up the cyber vendor team here. I'm delighted today to be joined by Steve Bakewell. Steve, how are you?
Hi, very well, thank you, Sean.
Good. Thanks for joining. So Steve is a technical security leader within the cyberspace. He has worked for a host of startups across the years. And he's joining us today to continue our series where we talk about vendors moving into new territories and the do's and don'ts and things he's experienced and kind of advice from his side. So Steve, guess we'll kick it off. I'll let you give your own intro, maybe a bit more detail of where you come from, what you've been doing recently, and kind of where you're at in your career, and then we can go into a little bit more detail.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So I'm approaching my 25th year in the industry, sadly, and it's split roughly half and half, customer side and vendor side. First half of my career up to about 2013 was customer side, many different security hats. And then I just decided one day that I wanted to try the startup thing. So I got in with a vendor out of California at a good time and really enjoyed it. And the startup environment is, I always say this when people ask me about it, is equally fun and frustration. And you've got to be able to deal with both of those things to kind of work within that kind of environment. And yeah, spent the last 10 years vendor side, mainly in the startup space, in that sweet spot where companies are getting into a market such as EMEA or the UK.
Nice. Thanks for the intro. So I think it's kind of fair to say most cyber startups we see come to the market now tend to be Israeli backed or US backed. There's obviously a big influx of European vendors coming through and UK vendors, but generally the market leaders tend to be US or Israeli, from experience anyway, from over the past 10 years. Yeah. You've worked with both and helped them grow into new regions. From question I kind of would like to find out, and I think you've probably been very privy to this, especially at kind of leadership level and some of the roles you've held. Is there like cultural challenges when you say you're working for it? Let's go Israeli to start with. I mean, US vendor, we want to move into EMEA. We've not done it before. Like cultural challenges and things like that you come up against. Like, how do you tackle that, and how do you educate, I guess, the CEO or the rest of the C-suite on how to move into foreign markets such as Europe?
For an American company, there's two parts to that, really. First of all, there is the cultural difference in how you sell to people. Yep. In America, it does seem that if you are a CISO or a buyer, you expect to get sold at. And that is entirely different to how it works over here. You know, I've lost count of the times where I've been sat with a CISO, not necessarily in an office, just in a social setting, and we talk about the sales process. And we got to that point where some of them just don't want to engage with vendors because of that selling at you kind of approach. So it's much more relationship based over here. And I think that's probably the first part of what we look at when we bring a US vendor into EMEA. The obvious second part of bringing a US vendor into EMEA is there's lots of different languages across EMEA. And that's a challenge in lots and lots of different ways. And sometimes it's not even recognized that that's true. So I think getting your head around both of those two things, the difference in which we sell here compared to America, but also that language differentiator, they're the two key things that I see.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think you're right. I think a lot of mistakes that people have made previously are, let's hire someone in Europe, probably the UK, and then they'll sell into the whole of Europe, right? And it'll be a success, and then we'll grow the team. But the kind of reality is that if you want to sell into certain markets like the French market, the German market, and if you go further afield into the Middle East especially, you really need to have people on the ground, or at least speaking the languages, right? And understand how to sell in to different cultures. It's very hard to just bring one or two people in, say a salesperson and an SE alongside them, and sell into the whole of EMEA. Like you say, relationships and stuff will get you a certain way, especially in certain locations. But outside of that, it's very difficult, right? It's hard to just do that with one person or two people.
Yeah, I've seen it done in both ways to varying levels of success. So take a team in the UK and use that team to build out across EMEA, and then build a complete EMEA team, and you're absolutely right. In DAC, people want to speak their local language. In France, they want to speak their local language. So I would say if you are coming into EMEA and you have the money to do it, but that's how you build your sales team. But if you don't, just recognize that that's a constraint that you've got to live with. And actually, one of the ways in solving that problem is having a real strong partner offer. Because if you've got a strong partner offer, that can take you into parts of EMEA where you don't have your own team. And I've seen that work quite well in the Middle East, for example.
Yeah, let the partners do the work for you. I think you're absolutely right. The Middle East, for sure. We speak to vendors all the time that are trying to break into the Middle East. And my advice is build your partner network out, or get someone to do that for you at least, because it just culturally in the Middle East, if you don't have the right connections with the right partners, it's kind of a non-starter, right? You can't just go out there and cold sell to everyone. It doesn't work.
So that's really important at the moment. You look at the sort of like macroeconomic environment we're in across, the Middle East, Western Europe, and America. The Middle East is going to be a critical, I mean, it already is, but it's going to be an even more critical region.
Yeah, I agree. So little kind of, I guess, more on a personal level, someone like yourself. So you've held roles within a bunch of vendors. And your role's, the reason I wanted to speak to you is your role's kind of a little bit more unique, I'd say, than other people I've spoken to. So throughout this series, I'm speaking to what I would call traditional sales leaders, new business hunters, go out there and knock down doors. You've been in kind of like a field CISO role as of late, which is, I'm seeing more and more of pop up, especially within vendors. And I think there's real value in it, the sense that you're quite commercially minded, but you're also very technical and you have a good understanding of how the product works, and you can kind of get that across when you're in meetings with customers, etc. How does that work from your side? Like, and at what stage do you come on board? So say, again, go back to the start. I'm a US vendor or an Israeli vendor. I'm coming into Europe. How does your job work, and who do you work alongside? Do you work directly with the VP of sales for that region, and your job is to kind of act as a sales engineer, but also be more commercially minded in a sense that you can help them knock down doors? But yeah, how does it work?
Generally speaking, that's true. I work alongside the first sales hire, and I've been the first technical hire. And you can say, right, okay, you've got a seller, you've got an SE, you can go to market and have conversations with people, you can cover the commercial and the technical. But the reality is, when you are in an environment where you're one of two people building out a new region, you do much more than that. And also, I think the reality with the sales engineer role is that you have to be more than technology, because otherwise you fall foul of that problem of just throwing technology at a wall and hoping some will stick. You've still got to do that due diligence of helping people understand what the problem is you're trying to solve. So you go beyond just what you might think a normal sales engineer does. So and you're right. The kind of roles I've had recently are more strategic, but also still within the sales organization, but not necessarily into the technology, pressing buttons and all the rest of it. It's having that conversation which answers that problem of what I mentioned a few minutes ago, which is we don't want to get sold to. Well, great, because in some roles I don't even have sales in my title, which means I'm going to have a conversation with you, and we're just going to talk about your how you do your work, what problems you're having, all in the context of who I work for sure. But it's not an overt sales motion. It's a human interaction. And that resonates quite well, I found. And at the point where it does turn into a sales motion, then that's where you can bring in the seller, and it becomes more of a traditional, sale from that point, sales process. But it does answer that question of how do we get to talk to people who potentially want to buy something we've got without selling at them and making them, turn away from the conversation.
Yeah, it's quite a clever approach, and I've seen more and more of it over the last few years. I think traditional way of setting up in a new region is hire a salesperson, hire an SE, and just go kind of pedal to the floor. Let's just try and knock down doors and sell the products. But as the market evolves and there's more and more products, and especially as the products get more complex, there's real value in someone like yourself being there to go, as you said, look, we're not trying to sell to you. Let's have a chat. Let's talk about it, on a technical level and what the product does. How can it solve your issues? And And then when the time's right and the trust is built and that relationship's there, go, okay, right, now we bring in the sales team and we can kind of go through commercial stuff and blah, blah, blah. So I think it's quite interesting. And I think your job's quite, not unique as in you're the only person that does it, but unique as in there's not many of those roles out there, but I'm seeing more and more. I strongly urge, from my side of the fence, I strongly urge vendors that are going into new regions to look at that way of doing it, because I think it does work and I think there's genuine value in it. So at what point do you kind of get to a stage where like, right, we're going to grow and add to the team? And I guess from your perspective, when you end up building a team and growing a team, what does that look like? Because technically you're not the sales leader, you have a VP of sales, so they'd kind of be responsible for, the AEs and maybe the BDRs and those sort of guys. Mm-hmm. You then tend to kind of oversee the whole thing, or do you take control of more of the SE side of things?
The latter, historically. So yeah, as we build that team out, you're right. The VP sales will be looking at bringing in and interviewing the right people for those AE roles, and I would look at doing the SE roles as well.
Nice.
And when I do that, I'll be for sure looking at people, getting them to do the things that I want them to do for the company perspective during that interview process. So I'll be getting them to present, getting them to demo. Because one thing I did find, I'm amazed at how many people don't do that during the sales hiring process. I know. Because that's exactly what you're going to be asking them to do for your company. So I try and do that all the time as well. And I've hired some really good people.
Yeah, I always find that process, whenever I've recruited for sales engineering people before and there isn't a technical demonstration in there, it kind of worries me a little bit that I'm like, are you hiring people because you like them or because they're the most skilled and best for the job? And it's a little bit, a bit of a strange situation to be in, where I have to kind of go, take a step back and go, maybe you should add another process in. Like normally as a recruiter, right, we want to get the process kind of through as seamlessly as possible and get to offer and everyone's happy. But actually sometimes taking a step back and going, you should add this process in because longer term it is going to help you establish who's the right person for the job. So yeah, good point. I've seen it as well. So kind of one thing I did want to ask you, and I'm sure, and again, no need to mention names and throw anyone under the bus, but during your kind of career, which has spanned, as you said, 20 plus years, I'm sure you've seen some horror stories. And what would you advise people not do, especially in the last 10 years, if we're talking startups and going into new regions? Is there some key things that you'd say that just doesn't work?
Yeah, I think a very simple one is don't assume that what works where you are is going to work when you move into a new region. Some of the things we've already touched on today, cultural differences and all the rest of it, they do make a difference. And that means you're going to have to change the way you do things. So I think that's the problem. And the solution to that is bringing in the right team from the kickoff in that region. People who've done it before, they've got the playbook, they've written the playbook, they've got the numbers behind them. Let them put their strategy in front of you and then let them execute on it. Because what I have seen in the past is you get so far down that kind of road, but then you're always lent onto, well, this works here, so let's try that there. And that's the main problem I see, is just assuming that is the case.
Yeah, I think it's... we see that a lot, right, with US, Israeli vendors, because it's worked in one place. They kind of try and cookie cutter it and use it in Europe, and it doesn't work for a number of reasons. And if you're hiring, a sales leader and a sales engineering leader or a field CISO to come in and do that job, and you're paying them all this money to do it, then you kind of got to just put your trust in them that they know what they're doing. And that's why it's also so key that you get the right person on the ground first, and you don't make the mistake once or twice and go through people, churn through, because I've seen startups before churn through 2 or 3 sales leaders before they get it right. And if they just take the time a little bit at the start and hire someone that's proven and done it, and maybe is more expensive, or maybe they haven't sold into the regions they have in plan. So for instance, they might want to go into the German market, but this person might be saying, well, actually, I think you should look at Benelux first or the UK. And it's actually listening to those plans before jumping the gun and going full steam ahead. Because like we said earlier, there's so many markets in Europe itself. it's not one big market. And I thought, or in EMEA as in general, right? We mentioned the Middle East is super important nowadays. People just kind of treat it as one thing, and I think that's a key, a key mistake to avoid.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. Look, I think some good kind of insights, some good knowledge. It was really good to get your perspective, Steve, from a different angle almost, and not what we were saying, out and out new business door kicker. I think the field CISO kind of role holds a lot of leverage nowadays, and I think it's something we'll see more and more of over the next few years, especially within these startup vendors. So look, thanks for talking to me today. I really appreciate it. And I know you're a volunteer within Tech Vets as well. So Steve's always available. People want to reach out to him for advice, and look, appreciate your time.
Been a pleasure. Thank you, Sean.
Cheers, Steve.